Head sõbrad, head külalised, meil on hea meel tervitada teid järjekordsel, nüüd siis juba 20. avatud ühiskonna foorumil. Kuna meie töökeel on täna inglise keel, siis lubage mul siinkohal jätkata inglise keeles. Dear guests, dear friends, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all at the 20th Open Society Forum. For 25 years, our foundation has stood for the development of an open society here in Estonia. Just a couple of minutes ago, you saw a short video which expresses our vision of smiling, friendly, and open Estonia. The Open Estonia Foundation organizes the Open Society Forum for the 20th time. And we have been truly lucky to see so many influential thinkers, journalists, politicians, and opinion and civil society leaders from Estonia and abroad exchanging their ideas on our forums. They have provided fresh ideas and new insights into burning issues, be it the future of Europe, populist political forces, information wars, Russia, and other topics. In the OF, we believe in the power of public and open debates that bring different people together, gives food for thought, and inspires relearning and critical thinking. When I chose the topic of this year's forum, none of us had an idea of where we would find the world or ourselves to be today. We certainly didn't want to believe that the refugee issue in Europe could turn into a full-blown crisis. Today, Europe is facing the biggest asylum crisis in the Second World War, and it is here to stay. Both radical Islam and the rise of the populist right create strong emotional reactions in our society and also throughout Europe. How should the media effectuate social responsibility under the conditions of the growing easiness of polarizing societies? These are the issues of our 20th Open Society Forum today. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our speakers, our panelists, Ahmed Rashid, Quentin Peel, Ilmar Raag, Urve Eslas, Miga Peterson, Bernd Olufsen, Didis Melbiksis, and Anvar Samost. We are very grateful to Baltic News Service and Norwegian Embassy for their support and amazing partnership. I am also very, very thankful to my colleagues in the Open Estonia Foundation and Laur Kaunisaare, who made this forum happen. Finally, I would like to say some general information about the forum. Our forum is transmitted on the internet with Estonian translation on the website of the Daily Postimees and in English on the website of the Open Estonia Foundation. The working language today is English with Estonian translation available, and feel free to use your smartphones to tweet and use Facebook, Instagram as much you like to. And now I would like to introduce our first speaker, a Pakistani journalist and writer, Ahmed Rashid, for a keynote speech, The Challenge of Islam and the Refugee Crisis. Please, Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Well, it's a very great pleasure to be here. I love your country. I've been here twice already, and thank you very much, Open Society, for inviting me again. I've got a lot to say in 15 minutes, so let me just first of all start by talking about identity. Certainly, you know, the Estonian people have a very special identity. And you are very proud of that identity, and you don't want to lose that identity. But identity in today's world is a multi-layered thing. There is no single identity of being a white, Christian, a Western, whatever. There are multiple layers of this. And my own experience with Estonians, the first Estonian I met was in Afghanistan. He was an army officer in the Red Army dealing with the Afghan tribes in 1982. You would not expect an Estonian to be doing that. The second bunch of Estonians I met was in Kyrgyzstan, in Central Asia in 1986, who were the children of people who had been kicked out by Stalin, who had been sent to the Gulag by Stalin. And these Estonians were married to Kyrgyz. And so, the Estonian diaspora has produced, obviously, a lot of other identities. They have children who are of mixed, half Estonian, half Kyrgyz, or half Russian or Tajik, depending on, who they marry. So, and then the other aspect is that if there is going to be an immigration of Muslim migrants from these refugees from Syria, etc., there's also a huge immigration of Estonians who are leaving for abroad. There are Estonians running some of the airline services in the Gulf, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai right now. And I'm sure there are many, you have a huge diaspora of Estonians who left this country during the Soviet period and have ended up in America and all the rest of it. Your own president, I think, has spent a lot of his life outside this country. So my first point is that, identity has many different layers. And the right wing today tries to assert a single identity to you, to me, to other people, and that just is not the case. The second aspect of the identity is that you have yourselves been victims. The whole of the 20th century, you were victims of Stalinism, of Hitler, of the Nazis. There has been mass killing in these regions, as you know, Second World War, etc. So Estonians have themselves been victims, just like these refugees today are victims. So there is a way that you have to think of these people and relate it also to your own historical experience of your parents and your grandchildren and all the rest of it. Now, who are these refugees? Well, what we know is that the bulk of these refugees are Syrians and Iraqis and other nationalities, but predominantly Syrians and Iraqis, who fled Syria and Iraq because of the war and have been living in UN camps in Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, and in Iraq itself. And what has happened in the last 5 years? Well, the first thing is that there has been no determined effort by the international community to end these wars and make peace, particularly in Syria. And the latest escalation we've just seen, that now Putin is sending troops to Syria to bolster the government of President Assad. There's been no effort to resolve. And secondly, the donations to the UNHCR and the UN organizations and the Red Cross and all the big NGOs, which should have been increasing to keep these refugees in place and provide them a refugee life is never easy, but to provide them some facilities in these camps. In fact, we saw that the funding has gone down sometimes by 30%. The World Food Programme 3 weeks ago announced that they were cutting all food lunch programs for about 300,000 people in Jordan. So what happened? These refugees, after 4 years in the camps, facing a worse situation than before, decided to up and set off for Europe. Now, what is very interesting about the majority of these refugees entering Germany, at least, many of them are middle class. And I'm sure you've noticed on your TVs, they're speaking English, they're educated, they've got iPhones, they've got GPS, they're using the most modern means to try and reach Germany. They're with their children, they've got families. And the Germans understand this. And of course, one reason why the Germans are taking in 800,000 is because the Germans have a skilled labor shortage. And they would probably want to employ a lot of these people. So we're talking about a large proponent of these refugees who are middle class, and when a lot of them, surveys that have been done as to why they left these camps, I mean, one was obviously because the conditions were getting worse, food supplies, money, etc. was getting worse. But the second thing was that the schools were shutting down. Our children were not being educated in these refugee camps. That's why we left. At least when we reach Germany, our children will be educated. Now, that is a classic middle-class demand. It's not that I want a job, I want to make money, etc. Our children want an education and need an education. So this refugee crisis that is coming. It's a whole different ballgame. Yes, we've seen the boat people going to Australia and the boats crossing from Africa to across the Mediterranean. But this is a whole, different class of people and a different kind of crisis. This is a crisis of neglect. That's all. And to be blamed should be the Europeans and the Americans in particular. The Americans, of course, started this crisis with the invasion of Iraq in 2003, which was, I think, the mother of all mistakes by the international community. And today, obviously, I mean, where is President Obama in this crisis? He's absolutely nowhere. I mean, has he made even a decent statement? And the Americans have now, I think, decided to increase the number of refugees they'll take by a tiny amount, compared to what is needed. So, we're still not getting, an international reaction. And frankly, the anger at the international community and the international leadership in Europe and in the United States is running very high at the moment. So then don't talk about Islamic extremism and Islamic this and, etc., when, you are not prepared to deal with these issues and you're not prepared to have a proper diplomatic effort to bring all the different layers of the Syrian conflict together. Syria is very complicated. We've got Russia and Iran backing Assad. We've got the Saudis and the Americans backing some different of the opposition groups in Syria. But at the same time, the Americans don't want Assad they don't want to attack Assad. The Arabs want to attack Assad. Now, I agree, it's a very complicated picture. But, if there's absolutely no diplomatic effort being made to correct it, then obviously we are going to see one crisis after another. The other fault, of course, is the Arab leaders. This is a conflict in the Arab world. This is a conflict within the Muslim world. ISIS is promoting sectarianism within the Muslim world. It's also, of course, creating huge tensions with the non-Muslim world, but essentially the war between Shia and Sunni that ISIS is promoting is the most dangerous thing that the Muslim world has frankly faced in the last 200-300 years, since the period of colonialism. This is the real war that is going on in the Muslim world. Shia versus Sunni. ISIS trying to say that the Shias are illegitimate and they should all be slaughtered. Not to speak of the non-Muslims, which ISIS is also slaughtering. And let me just make one other point. These refugees are running from ISIS. They're trying to avoid the embrace of ISIS. They do not want anything to do with ISIS. They don't want their kids to embrace ISIS, which is why we're seeing this flight. So these are not Muslims who are going to be, bringing the ISIS ideology with them. These are Muslims who are going to hopefully be helping Europe deal with the ISIS crisis and provide incentives for Muslims who are already living here to reject ISIS. So now, just a few minutes on Islam. The problem, the biggest problem in Europe, and which the Europeans are not proud of, is that after the Second World War, a lot of the big colonial powers took in Muslim labor from their ex-colonies. The British took in the Pakistanis and the Indians and Kashmiris and Bangladeshis. The Germans took in the Turks. The French took in the North Africans, the Algerians, and others. And now all of them had different integrationist policies. And all of them failed, which is why we're seeing some of these young Muslims from this kind of background who've been second, third generation living in France or England going to join ISIS. Now, they all failed for various reasons. I can discuss that with you later, but I mean, they all failed. So the point is, and change, real positive change in integrationist policies in these European countries only started after 9/11. After September the 11th. And now there is, I think, a much more positive integrationist policies which countries are pursuing. And there's more coordination through the European Union and other organizations and even through Open Society, etc. And people are learning from each other's experiences and how to resettle migrants and Muslims in particular. So the first thing is that you should not be looking towards Europe for solutions. You will have to create, I mean, if you're going to take in refugees, which I hope you do, you will have to create integrationist policies which suit Estonia and which suit the Estonian people as a whole. Now, you also don't have a very good record of that, given the Russian population in Estonia. As far as I understand, the Russians are not very well integrated into Estonian society, either because they don't want to be, which is probably the case in many instances, or because you've not had the right policies to do that. So the issue of integration and the policy towards integration, whether it's 200 refugees or 500 refugees, is going to be very important. And this is what people like yourselves should be thinking about from now. And for example, yes, I mean, people were talking to me about, well, there's a big debate about where the mosque should be built. I said, this has nothing to do with the mosque. The mosque is the last thing on the agenda. The first thing is on the agenda is, how are you going to teach these children and these adults Estonian, the language? What kind of schools are you going to send them to? How are you going to train the teachers who will be educating them? What kind of jobs can you give these people? The issue is not the mosque. The issue is what the integrationist policy is. Don't get sidetracked by, especially the right wing, who'll say, "Oh, I mean, it's all about the mosque and halal meat and etc." The real issue is going to be social, political, and economic. Lastly, I just want to say, ISIS is not Islam. We all know that. And unfortunately, Muslim leaders around the world, but particularly Arab leaders, have completely failed to educate the world and our people as to how bad ISIS is. There's no religion in the world which allows the rape of women, the forced marriage and with young girls, the killing of non-Muslim minorities like the Yazidis and the Christians, the destruction of antiquities and ancient and pre-Islamic civilizations. I mean, there is no religion in the world which promotes anything like that. We know all the religions in the world, even for the most secular people, in Estonia, all the religions of the world promote peace, love, brotherhood, non-violence. There's no religion that promotes war or anything like that. So the fact of the matter is that ISIS is a horrible creation, but I mean it's a creation of all sorts of events and miscalculations and bad policies that have been pursued both by Arab leaders and by the West, and particularly the Americans. But but ISIS really, I think we all have to fight ISIS because it's affecting all our societies. It's not just affecting my society; it's affecting all the European countries. So I hope that Estonia finds a way to acknowledge these refugees and to play its role in the European Union, and to be creative and create new ideas towards integration and to how to settle these refugees in your society, and let them take part in the well-being and the prosperity that you have seen in the last 25 years since the end of the Soviet Union. Thank you very much indeed.
Ahmed, thank you very much for all those thoughts, for a very thought-inspiring and somewhat provocative introductory speech, which I think is great to really set us off on the road. My name's Quentin Peel. I worked for many years for the Financial Times, where I'm delighted now to see Ahmed Rashid as one of our columnists writing from Pakistan. I finished with the Financial Times a year ago, a little over a year ago, with 4 years in Germany. I was living in Berlin, and now I'm back in London. And it gives me a certain perspective on the Europeanness of this debate. And also I have in my background a period when I actually worked in the former Soviet Union for the last 3 years of the former Soviet Union, from 1988 to 1991. And that's when I first had the great joy of coming to Estonia. And when Mal said last night, thank you very much for accepting an invitation to Estonia, my response was, I will never refuse an invitation to Estonia. It was actually a wonderful little breath of fresh air sometimes to come up from Moscow in those years and come to Estonia. It's always been a little bit like that. I also have a very special feel for small countries as opposed to big countries. I'm an Englishman. I come from what in global terms still thinks of itself as a big country, although we're not that big. My wife comes from Ireland, which certainly sees itself as a former small oppressed colony of the English. And I've used this little expression once before in Estonia, but I do think it's worth remembering for those who come from big countries. My wife always says to me, you know, the problem with the English is the English never remember and the Irish never forget. And I suspect that's quite a good thought too to the Estonia-Russia relationship. We've heard from Ahmed some very interesting and provocative statements about identity and about the failure of European integration, and a challenge, I think, to Estonia to say, Estonia, like the rest of Central and Eastern Europe, open your doors too to this refugee flow. Ilmar Raj, you are our Estonian on the panel. Are Ahmed's challenges to you relevant, and can they play a part in this debate?
Well, there's no doubt that we are facing real challenges. This is quite obvious for everybody who's living in Estonia, that the world is literally turned upside down since May, basically. And what's really surprising for Estonia, that we discovered this topic only this year. And I think that this has been some kind of denial that that would be suitable for some kind of psychoanalytical analysis.
But isn't it understandable that people here would say, we don't have any refugees worth speaking of, it's not our problem?
Yes and no. In Estonian debate, there has been always these two arguments. First, that Estonians have been refugees after the Second World War, and this part of the stories of those Estonians who fled after the Second World War, this is really an important part of our historical knowledge. Then the second, the big topic is what happened in the last 20 years of Soviet ruling, that the Estonian generally described as a uncontrolled immigration that is more suitable to name as a kind of colonization, where the Russian-speaking people came from Soviet Union. There were not only Russians, there were also Ukrainians, White Russians, and so on, and who created a situation where we remember and recall with the with some proud feelings of a letter of 40, where important Estonian intellectuals wrote an open letter to stop Russification. But what happened behind all that, these events was that all the different kind of migration was then perceived as something definitely negative. And what happened after that was also the inability to distinguish refugees from the other people who are coming to work or to study at the Estonian universities. For many Estonians, they are all just those others, and those others were badly labeled during the last year's Soviet ruling. Now when starting from this spring, suddenly we started to hear the word of European solidarity. This was quite a very new term for us. And I think that we don't have any very quick solution to that. I think that we can come to good terms only if we accept those other people and they are living with us for a certain time, and then we see that nothing bad happens.
Okay, let me come back to Ahmed, and then I want to get a ding-dong going between you if I can. But I mean, when you see this apparent division opening up in Europe between Western Europe, which says we must let them in, these are refugees, and Eastern Europe, symbolized for many of us in our television sets by Hungary, putting up a new Iron Curtain with razor wire just for good measure. Does that shock you?
Yes, it does. I mean, to see the reaction of the Hungarians escalate day by day has been really very shocking. And of course, there are other countries now in Central Europe which are going to probably go down the same road. Today the news is the refugees are trying to go into Croatia and trying to bypass Hungary completely. I mean, this is. But I think the other real thing is that the entire European strategy at the moment is a sort of hour by hour, day to day decision making. There has not been a proper strategy. The Germans have been urging everyone to adopt a proper strategy, and other countries have been too, but there hasn't been one, and it doesn't look likely that a summit is going to produce one. Until we get better coordination in Europe, I fear very much for what the refugees are going to suffer and what the repercussions of this are going to be in the wider Muslim world. Not just with ISIS and Al-Qaeda and these militant groups, but the respect for Europe in amongst ordinary Muslim governments and countries. Is Europe going to be seen entirely through the prism of Hungary now? I mean, that would be awful if that is the case.
But you go on.
Yeah. So you think that the Hungary is a symbol of contemporary Europe and not the Germany?
No. I hope that Hungary does not become a symbol of contemporary Europe. I mean, it's just been a few days. We've seen this policy escalate by Hungary. I mean, it's been too soon. I mean, I don't think we've seen that global impact or the impact in the Muslim world of what the Hungarians are doing. But if this continues, the Hungarians continue down this path and say tomorrow refugees are shot dead because they're trying to cross the wire and trying to come into Hungary, then what happens?
Unfortunately, from a media point of view, television shots of razor wire and miserable refugees are actually more dramatic than television shots of polite Germans clapping refugees when they arrive in Munich. But Ilmar, I wanted to take you up on one thing you said. You said European solidarity is a new term for us. But surely European solidarity was what you expected when you joined the European Union in terms of a new member state coming in. And isn't this merely now if you like, the quid pro quo, that European solidarity is sharing the burdens as well as sharing the benefits.
You are touching exactly or knocking at the right door in this sense. Yes, the probably the most important Estonian novel of the last 20 years has been a novel Rehepap about the very smartest Estonian guy from 19th century who was cheating on everybody. And he's a funny guy and has some sentimental feelings. But most Estonians love this novel because they recognize this kind of lovely cheating as the part of their national character. And I'm not saying
Sort
that...
of good soldier Schweik of Estonian style.
I don't know, he's really smart. This guy, Schweik, is not smart. But then the thing is that, yes, we hope to join Europe basically because we hope to get a lot from Europe. And the idea that the solidarity has two ways traffic, I think that this is not really widely understood in Estonia. And we started to embrace this idea maybe first when we had to decide something about the Greece financial crisis. And then anyway, those money questions were difficult to embrace because in the end this was government and parliament who decided whether we approve the new aid packages or not. But in this case, in the refugee case, this is really a question of everyday's acceptance of having other people as their neighbors. And in this case, I think the solidarity question becomes the real one.
But if I may, the fact is that Estonia is being threatened by Russia.
Yeah.
And you have NATO protection, you have European solidarity with you, which is presumed, I mean, given the fact that you're a very small country with hardly any military capability, you do have some kind of protection. Now, it may not be to your satisfaction, but the fact is that Europe and NATO is giving you something. And I think what is going to be, they're going to ask for something in return, which is going to be to keep some of these refugees.
No, I'm not the one who is going to argue with that. But from the other side, if I try to interpret some messages inside our society, then there is one narrative that is saying that actually NATO is protecting us, whereas the European Union is much less understood in security terms. So that even if European Union would fail, then we would still have NATO.
I've always argued, but I am a bit alternative perhaps on this, that actually the economic security is far the more important than the military security. There are no guns and bullets and missiles that will ever be able to totally protect a tiny little country like Estonia from a great big country. But if the model that you are demonstrating is an economic model that works, that actually is a far better.
No, but I'm really defending the wrong argument, because I think that it doesn't mean that we think that within NATO we should understand solidarity, and in the framework of European Union we say that in certain issues this is a good thing, and in other issues really it's not of our concern. As for example, if we're talking about the refugees, then today we are talking still about the big and very serious crisis that is about 1,500 kilometers from Estonia, and we know that so far there hasn't been any this spontaneous refugee influx from Syria or from some other countries. We do have what I would like to call those spontaneous refugees who are coming from Russia or through Russia, but their number is really very, very small comparing to the situation in Hungary or there in Balkans.
I wanted to go back to one of Ahmed's points from his keynote at the beginning, the failure of Europe's integration policies in all its different models. And then we can maybe come back and see if this is at all relevant to Estonia. But I think we all agree on this panel that this migration issue, this refugee question, is one that can only be answered in Europe with a pan-European solution. It's clear that every country doesn't do it. But what we have, this track record that we have over many years, is an integration policy with our Muslim communities that has semi-failed in Britain, in France, in Germany, in other countries, the Netherlands and Belgium. At least it's failed to the extent of creating a backlash. Now, we're going to talk again in the second session here about the media and populism and so on. But one, why has it failed? Is it entirely the Europeans' fault that it's failed? Is it the immigrants' that it's fault that it's failed? Where can we find the model that's going to make it work?
Well, look, I mean, I really think if Muslim migrants move to a country to work, there are certain essential things that those migrants need to do for integration. They need to be re-educated, which means you probably have to put them through school, even adults. They have to learn the language. They have to learn the culture, etc. Now, I think all this was done very half-heartedly and lackadaisically by the big countries who imported labor, you know. And what instead happened was a ghettoization. You had Muslims started to live in ghettos, meeting and speaking with each other, working for Muslim shops or businesses or companies, never learning the language, never learning the culture, never speaking to a local resident, not making friends with the local resident. And of course, as we know, the other phenomenon that happens with emigre groups, which I'm sure I was told yesterday that you know very well in Estonia too, emigre groups always tend to be extremely right-wing, conservative, traditional, and they are not part of the sort of liberal part of your society. So for example, I know very well, Pakistanis living in America, doing extremely well, earning $500,000 a year as doctors and professionals, are the most reactionary and the most backward people because they are constantly demanding military rule. They don't believe in democracy. Now, these are the richest Pakistanis living in America. Now, I'm sure there are probably Estonians living in America who come back to Estonia and say that you should follow right-wing policies and keep everybody out and keep Estonia pure and etc. And I think this is a phenomenon also that. So these refugees, I mean these migrants who tend to be badly settled, have had no cultural integration, also then go through this process of right-wingism, if you like. And it's a double whammy, and it becomes extremely dangerous, unfortunately. I think things have improved since 9/11. I'm not an expert on these matters, but things have improved in several countries, I think particularly Britain. I don't think so in France, because you're still getting riots outside Paris and all these ghettos in France. But in Britain, I think things have improved. And I think in Germany too. But this is a challenge that has to be faced up to.
I mean, in Britain, some things have improved, but the truth is that the British government's immigration policy is a pretty good disaster. It really is feeble in comparison with Angela Merkel's immigration policy. But Ilmar, you know France very well. Why do you think things haven't worked in France better? Is it this aggressive form of secularism that you get in France? What's the problem there?
I would like to think that those problems are substantially the same all over Europe. We may think that there is a part of the question of different religions, and in France, definitely they are talking a lot about Republican values, valeurs républicaines. But then, if we recall those riots in suburbs, then we have seen similar riots also in UK, in Sweden, and well, I think we may find them in other places also. But I would take something more, let's say, the Estonian. For me, it was very interesting to look the different dynamics of Estonian different migration waves. There were Estonians who went to France before the Second World War, and those were what we like to call the cultural migrants, because they thought that Estonia is too small and too boring, while Paris was the center of the world for them. And then they hoped to have better jobs in France. In this sense, they hoped also to live better off in France. Those people were generally described as people who tried to become French. They learned very quickly, they knew French before, but they really made an effort to be more French than Estonian. Then there was a second wave where the refugees who came after the Second World War in the 40s and in the beginning of 50s even. And I was really surprised when I met those people in the beginning of 90s who basically hated France. Everything was wrong in France. And definitely the wrong thing was that the France has accepted so many colored people. Like you said, they were mostly very right-wing conservatives. And then I thought, okay, there was definitely an ideological difference between the first and second generation of migrants. That those people who are refugees, they are not happy with this migration, and they tend to be less integrated for a longer time. I had another conversation in Canada, where there's also a big Estonian community, and I asked an old man in Toronto, so when you decided that you would stay in Canada and you won't return to Estonia, and he said, okay, maybe around 55, I decided that okay, I will spend my life the rest of my life in Canada, 10 years. And it means 10 years wasted for integration efforts of a Canadian state. We all think that it seems logical that the main effort should be made in education. There's almost no other ways to think that there's a two-ways movement. From one side, you teach to the local people that it's okay to have different people, and then to those people who are coming to teach the local language and local habits. But we know that it's not working, and that's why I think that we shouldn't think that we will solve this problem for real sometimes. The best what we can achieve is some kind of balance where people just live together and they don't fight.
If I may just add one thing about Hungary, I think the real elephant in the room, as far as what is happening in Hungary, and if that is to be the model for Eastern Europe and Central Europe, the real elephant in the room is racism. It is not that Hungary is giving you an intellectual argument as to why we will not accept Muslims, or why we will not accept people who are not Christian, or why we will not accept, but it is racism. And already we are seeing in Europe the rise of racist parties, or probably small groups rather than parties. But anyway, in several countries, especially in Holland, in Belgium and other France, and you are seeing already racist countries and racist parties. And if this crisis is going to continue, then I fear very much that the rejection of these refugees by some politicians is going to be on the basis of race and color rather than on the basis of Islam and religion and etc.
I would like to intervene with about this open society label. If we accept the argument that this Middle Europa, the Central Europe or the Eastern Europe are more racist today than the Western Europe, then we see that those are the societies that were closed for a very long time. And it seems that being closed is the best way to develop some kind of xenophobia or racist feelings.
I think that's, I mean, I know the contrast between Western Germany and Eastern Germany, having seen the unification process, and these Pegida demonstrations, anti-Muslim demonstrations and anti-immigrant demonstrations, were all very much starting in Eastern Germany. And then if you go back to look at the neo-Nazi attacks you saw and so on, a disproportionate number in Eastern Germany, which is the part of the country which is exposed least over the years to any form of immigration at all. I mean, Dresden, where Pegida began, has a minute number of actually foreigners, non-Dresdeners in their midst. So it's a fear of the unknown.
Absolutely.
Rather than a fear of the known. And I mean, it doesn't entirely work like that, but take in Britain, take London, the biggest melting pot of all. We've had our riots, but on the whole, it is a melting pot. It works. Everybody's, I mean, London would be nothing without its immigrant population. On the other hand, you do get your ghettoization, clearly, up in the north of England, where you get towns like Blackburn with 25% Muslim population, where the integration just hasn't worked, and there is, it's very difficult. But come back to Eastern Europe and the problem of Eastern Europe. In a way, because the communist system said, we don't have a problem, we are racially blind, they did nothing about the problem they actually did have, which is that we all need to tackle our inner racism, perhaps. Do you think that's a correct description of why there is a problem in the post-communist societies, that the questions of racial integration were never tackled?
It's not entirely true, because during the Soviet time, there was also a slogan of solidarity between...
But it was just a slogan, that's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, workers of all the countries.
Yeah.
And we had the pictures of people from different races chanting and singing together. All this we had. But we didn't see any real... well, I'm not absolutely right, but we almost didn't see any black person in Estonia. And if they were only in Tallinn, and everybody was looking at them because this was so new. And that's why you are correct in this sense that we are racist because we are ignorant. Whereas in an inside melting pot, you have different problems. And the different problems are coming from those ghettoization or the radicalization that have different roots. And my question is today that if we are to accept those different people into our society, we might also have the same problems that you have today. And the big question we are having today are how we should be better prepared for those conflicts.
I mean, that's what I'm arguing. I'm suggesting to you that you need to be looking at this problem from now. What kind of policies will you pursue with Muslim refugees coming from the Middle East? How will you deal with them? How will you integrate them? You will have to develop your own ideas and your own methodology. and you should also learn from success stories that maybe exist in other countries. But
Maybe you have just one single advice to give to Estonians. What would be the beginning of good integration policy?
I think you have to you have to train a bunch of teachers in Estonian teachers in being who will be willing to spend 5 to 10 years with good salaries, etc., teaching these migrants, and obviously these teachers will have to have some. They will have to learn some Arabic. They will have to understand the culture of their students. They will have to be of a different caliber than your ordinary day-to-day teachers. But I think that, for example, is a start where you would be training a core group of people who would be dealing with these. The problem that is, I think, that is going to happen in Europe, of course, is that traditional bureaucracies are going to be confronted with these refugees. To register them and give them housing and health and their cards and ID and all the rest of it. And these people and this traditional bureaucracy will have absolutely no background in dealing with people from a completely different cultural background.
I've got a thought that linguistic openness is an important part. That is to say, embracing bilingualism rather than insisting that everybody should speak. Everybody should, from a practical point of view, speak the principal language of the country. But the fact that they may speak different languages in the home should actually be positively discriminated in favour of it. That children who come to school with a less good Estonian, for example, should be positively welcomed because they're going to speak more than one language. I have a daughter who's an anthropologist, and she did her thesis on the ambitions of migrant mothers in Berlin, in what they wanted their children to, how many children they wanted, what languages they should speak, what religion they should have. And what she discovered was not that these Turkish mothers all wanted their children to be little Turks and to hell with it. No, they wanted them to be both. They really wanted them to be both wholly German and wholly Turkish, if you like, at the same time. And Germany found it very difficult to accommodate that because Germanness was identified with speaking German. And so there was one mother who said, they won't let my children into the kindergarten because they don't come speaking German. But I want them to go to speak German.
I think it's very understandable, and the Estonians are the orthodox believers in this language issue, because this is even written in our constitution. But then our experience with the Russian population shows also that in a case when the Russian speakers or any new migrants are coming to learn in Estonian school, and they are spending a lot of time just learning Estonian while not learning so well other subjects in Estonian, we see that the final results are the worse than results of Estonians who have the Estonian as their native language. So we so far the Estonian experience is showing this difference of educational standards, and that this really, how to say it, we see that there's a social problems of those non-Estonians who are getting de facto worse education and who are not doing so well later in Estonian society. Mm-hmm. That's why, yes, the language issue is very crucial. And in this sense, I think that everybody in this audience can say something about the importance of this ideology of Estonian language and the openness. Because so far we have been very keen of saying that the official language in Estonia is Estonian language, and this is a holy thing.
I mean, who are we to criticise? Ahmed and I come here and we can talk English in front of an Estonian audience.
Yeah.
Or who am I above all? Ahmed speaks, I suspect, about 4 languages. Do you, Ahmed? Or 3 perhaps.
But at the same time,
But the English are hopeless.
no.
I think.
At the same time, Estonians are very proud that we speak also many languages because we are a small nation and we have to speak many languages. What Estonians require as a courtesy toward us is that the people who are coming here should speak with us in Estonian. But this is also quite a universal thing in every other country. But
I think it's going to be very important to see how this whole integration of the Russian population, given also the tensions with Putin and all the rest of it, how you work this out, you know, and what success you have in being able to have better relations with because I mean in all the 3 Baltics, this is a big problem. You've got very large Russian minorities who have in the last 25 years who really, I mean, who have not been properly integrated.
I agree.
For whatever
this
reason.
is true. This is true that there are tensions between those 2 communities, but at the same time, and even in a cynical way, we can say that the Estonian integration process has been still a little success because we haven't had really a big riots. We have had only one small riot that lasted just a couple of days.
Was that about the moving of the monument?
Yes.
Yeah.
In this sense, I think we still have hope with this integration process in Estonia. We definitely have lots of challenges, but I am not really desperate in this issue.
I want to open this up now to the audience, so that because we've got just about half an hour, I think, left in our conversation. So it would be great to get some views, questions from the floor. If you
may I have one question?
you okay?
Yes.
You can be the first question
Yeah.
from the not quite floor.
Yes. You said very eloquently that the conflicts inside the Arab world or in Asia are basically still the Asian conflicts. The conflicts between Shias and Sunnis and so on. My question is that in Pakistan, how are you dealing with the extremism while having the history of murdered prime minister and so on?
Well, unfortunately, the strategy to deal with extremism is a military strategy. And there's no political side to it, and there's no economic, educational, etc. Dealing with extremism, you need a comprehensive thing that covers, you know, all aspects of extremism. I mean, you need better schools, better teachers, better opportunities. I mean, our literacy rate is 58%. You know, that means nearly half the population doesn't go to school even. So, I mean, and instead, you know, the military is spending a lot of money on nuclear weapons, on armaments. We've got an army of 500,000 men, which is, frankly, you know, should not be that kind of number, given the crisis in the country. 30-40% of the budget goes on the military. You know, we have one of the lowest educational budgets in the world. So we're not dealing with this. I mean, I'm the first one to say we're not dealing with extremism the way we should be dealing. And you can't deal with extremism just at the military level. Go and kill everyone, you know, basically, which is what the policy is in Pakistan. And you know, everyone, you know, and then the armies applauded and said, very good, you've killed 25 people today and 25 extremists. Who knows how many of those were actual extremists and the rest, and how many were civilians. So unfortunately, we don't have a proper policy, and there's not much coordination with other Muslim countries. We're not learning from the experiences of others, and there's no if you have no political or economic base to offer these extremists, frankly, you know, you're going to be allowing generations of extremists to grow and develop.
And if a Pakistani turns up in Calais and crosses the Channel, should he be recognized, or she be recognized, as a refugee or an economic migrant?
Well, I think there's, as I said, because of the crisis, the economy is very bad. And there's huge nobody even knows what the figures are, but there's huge joblessness, and especially amongst the educated young or semi-educated young, people with university degrees or just short of university degrees. I mean, they really have no job option. The educational system is teaching all the wrong subjects. They're teaching subjects which go back to the British days, and in 19th century universities.
They were wrong then and they're still wrong now.
Yeah, no, I mean, in the sense of subject matter, you should be teaching skills and computers and all this kind of thing. Instead, they're teaching all these completely subjects which don't train you for the labor force, for the workforce. So I mean, it's a big problem because I think there are a lot of economic refugees who are coming, but there are also people who are escaping, for example, from Karachi, where the largest city in Pakistan, 19 million people, which is a cauldron of ethnic and violence, etc. Now, it's a tough one. How do you differentiate between a kid coming from Karachi who says he's escaping violence or a death threat or whatever, which is probably very legitimate, and another kid coming from Karachi who's quite obviously looking for a job?
Yeah, it's very difficult. Now, I've got several questions I saw over there. If you just tell us who you are when you begin.
Hello, I am Hella Tiikma. Right now I'm the vice chair of the Union of Journalists in Estonia and also a freelance journalist. But before that I was foreign news editor in national broadcasting for 19 years. So, well, the topic I have been dealing, this kind of topic I have been dealing for years. But listening to you, I have been sitting on pins and needles because there are so few, quite few things that I would actually like to remark. First of all, it was very interesting to listen to the outside view, which I can't agree with mostly. Most of the problem, to my mind, is connected with the word fear. And you didn't really, any of you, use it. Well, Mr. Peel, you used it for a moment, but pretty much not. There are so many levels of fear. Here in Estonia, we are afraid of being, run over. We have our historic memory that we can't actually get rid of ever. We have our fear of losing our nation. We have fear of losing our culture and so on and so forth. We have fear of losing our economic standards. We have lots of fears. And that is actually translated into this hatred and misunderstanding. And, of course, there is a lot of problems with not being knowledgeable enough. But still, the fear is the one that mostly, to my mind, brings out the worst bits of these.
Is that not fear of the unknown as much as fear of the known?
No, it's more a fear of known because we have had a very bad experience historically. I think. Of course, people are free to not to agree with me as well. The other thing that I was thinking about is English experience of Northern Ireland is something of the example of not being very, very good at bringing together two communities who live together, which is something that happens with our Russians. So this has to be looked from that kind of angle, and also that the rest of the western side of Europe doesn't really understand this thing that the eastern side has with these Russian speakers. They shouldn't actually dismiss it, and it's been dismissed pretty much. Brought out that, the refugees right now are different and the problem is not the same. Well, in some sense it is. You, Mr. Rashid, you were the one who said about having a lot of teachers for these immigrants. Well, a lot of teachers, yes, but I think that we should not have a lot of teachers for Muslim immigrants. We just have to have policy and teachers for immigrants to focus on someone's religion is something that feeds the fear right now.
Okay, so we.
I think there are more, but I will give now floor to other people.
Let's take one or two other people because
Yes.
there are two or three, I think, in the same area. All I think, and I hope we didn't sound in any way patronizing or anything like that. I think if I might say about whether it's Northern Ireland or the failure of integration policies in Britain, I would say all I'm saying is please don't make the same mistakes we have made. Do it better here. Let's take the next question.
Sorry, but people are not really very good at learning from other people's mistakes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Ivar Reik, former member of Estonian Parliament. We have heard today a lot of words about hard words about Hungary. And there is a racism, and they are building new iron curtains. I'm completely not agree with these comments because I believe that they are not racists, and they don't build curtains. They protect their own country, their own culture, and they have not enough capacity to integrate, to absorb foreigners. This is the problem. And now my question is, how to measure, how to increase the capacity of meeting migrants and refugees, because different countries have different histories, different experiences. Great Britain has integrated foreigners for more than 300 years since East Indian Company, and the same is all these big empires. They have more experience, but countries like Estonia, Hungary, who have never occupied other countries, they don't have such an experience, and that's why there is
Sure,
different.
Hungary's never occupied other countries, but go on.
Yeah, okay. Hungary was little empire. Yes, you're right. But Estonia and other East European countries, and this is a very dangerous if we put all these countries together and saying that all countries in Europe should act similarly.
How
in this
many
case.
refugees is Estonia being asked to take? Under the latest
Something
proposals?
300 now,
300.
or something. Yes.
Is that would be overwhelming?
I think that
you,
this
would
is
it?
not the big problem. This is not the big problem. Yes, but anyway, as it said, there are fears, and we don't have experience. How we can integrate them? This is and question was yes, capacity. How to measure capacity and readiness of each society in Europe to meet refugees and migrants.
Great. Was there somebody else just close by? Yes, over here. And then we'll answer the three questions.
My name is Blake Bromley. I'm a Canadian passing through town and would like to be un-Canadian enough to suggest that there is a successful integration model being the Ismailis in Canada. When Idi Amin kicked out the East Africans, Canada sent over military planes and brought tens of thousands in a number of months. And 50 years later, they are an unqualified success story in terms of their integration and their respect in the Canadian community and for Canada. I would suggest that the credit may not go to Canada as much as the role of the Aga Khan, as they were primarily Ismailis, and the leadership within their own community. And I would say that in my experience with primarily the Shia, who are well integrated out of Iraq and that area, the role of Ayatollah Sistani and with his aging Ayatollah Hakim in providing leadership towards integration is significant. But I would also say to the issue of identity, the the situation is very different today. And if you identify these people as Muslims, you get a negative response. If you identify the people as Syrian refugees, you get a much more humanitarian response.
Okay, thank you very much. Who would like to go first?
Let
Okay,
me
Omar.
let me start on the topic of fear. I think the fear is really very important word or concept here, and it's basically linked to the question that we cannot really understand the limits of this crisis. We don't know where will it end, or what would be an end state. Where is this new balance? And this is this unknown that creates fear. And this is not only a question for Estonia, but for most of Europe. Because if we criticize the European policies toward this management of this crisis, that starts from the point that we have not stated what is our end state.
What about the second question, that creating new border fences, boundaries, so on, in a way going against everything that Schengen and open borders has tried to create in the European Union, that is a valid way of protecting one's national
In Hungarian
identity.
case, I would say that we are mixing up two things. From the very formal point of view, as a Schengen country, they have even obligation to protect the borders. But
The external border.
external borders, yes. But from the other side, we are also listening what the official in Hungary is saying, and this goes beyond just protection of those external borders, and that's why they are they're attracting this kind of criticism from the other countries.
I mean, from my point of view, the problem there is, it's a problem about treating refugees with dignity. That's what really worries me. But Ahmed, how do you feel? How do you respond to the first question, that it's actually about fear?
Well, I agree with you in many ways, but I think the biggest fear you have, surely, is the threat of Russia right now. And the sending of these Russian troops to Syria, does that mean we're going to see an escalation in Ukraine and another advance of Russian forces into Ukraine, or more provocation on the border with the Baltics? You know, I mean, that probably is your biggest fear of all. And I mean, there's very little that you and I can do about that. That's going to depend on what, on what the international community is able to pull together. Let me just say again, something Quentin just said. In no way, whatever I said, I'm not trying to be arrogant or trying to, I was asked to be provocative, and I was asked to raise issues which perhaps other people wouldn't, and I've tried to do that. But I mean, I don't know Estonian history or all the finer details of your culture, language, and all the rest of it. I'm just speaking directly as an outsider. So please forgive me if you think that I've been perhaps over-speaking or over-exerting myself. The thing about Hungary is that, look, I mean, I think all I was trying to say, first of all, I never said Hungary was racist. I said that, the elephant in the room is racism, without specifically saying, but the fear is that certainly what Hungary is doing down the road could generate a racism, or certainly enhance racism in Europe generally, not just in Hungary. But I think, it's the repercussions down the road that I'm really fearing. Hungary is not a great economic success story. It has huge social problems of its own. Certainly, these refugees are going to make those social problems even worse. But I fear very much that Hungary's policies are going to, down the road, going to endanger its own image and credibility and investment, and have wide-ranging repercussions, which the Hungarians may really suffer very badly from. On the Smileys in Canada, certainly I think that is an example. But the fact is that the Ismailis who have come are are mostly educated. They come and they have skills. Many of them were middle class, even when they were living in Africa, or lower middle class, but they were skilled and educated. And so we're not looking at this at a mass of millions of refugees coming. We're looking at a section. But yes, I mean the integration policies were extremely good. But there was a huge, as you said, the Ismailis themselves made a huge effort to integrate themselves. And that's what we have to see here. I mean, we have to see the Syrians, wherever they are, making an effort themselves to integrate themselves. It's not just up to the host country.
The Ismaili example is a fascinating one. One of my 3 daughters, taught in an Ismaili school in the Hunza Valley for 6 months, and found it a remarkable experience. And the Ismailis, of course, are very liberal, very open-minded, but it does help to have the Aga Khan sitting there giving out a lot of money. It probably helps the Open Society Foundation to have George Soros there as well. There was a question here.
Yes, hello. My name is Priit Simson and I'm an editor of Estonian daily newspaper Eesti Päevaleht. And 10 days ago I was on the Hungarian-Serbian border seeing all this migration flow there, and even though the Hungarians got lots of scourging here today, I felt a little bit pity for them because they are put in a pretty much difficult situation because on one hand, there are Schengen rules. On the other hand, there is a huge influx of the refugees, and someone has to do that. Most of the there is a situation where the Hungarians are afraid that the refugees might stay in the country, and the refugees, on the other hand, are afraid that they might be compelled to stay in Hungary. It seems to me that there is a kind of common ground between those fears. And I would simply like to know that what do you really recommend for Hungary to do? Because actually Hungary is now in a situation where Greece clearly doesn't do any kind of identification procedures. Most of the guys who are still not yet in Hungary, they are afraid this identification procedure and taking this fingerprinting, that they think that this is clearly the sign that they might stay in Hungary and compelled to stay in Hungary. Actually, most of the kind of jams on the border are created because of this attempt to enforce the Schengen rules. What is your recommendation? What they might do to ease that kind of situation? Because, of course, I understand this razor wire brings lots of bad publicity and reminds all kind of Cold War era and things like that. But if it's replaced somehow with, I don't know, some other methods, then this all kind of they simply ran down. And this influx of the migrants are still uncontrolled. So, what's your recommendation? Do we skip all this identification procedure altogether, or what?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. There was a question here, straight at the back.
I am Anneli Rõigas, Estonian journalist. I have worked with all kinds of people from different religions, different colors. When I have been a journalist for Agence France-Presse over a decade and also at the United Nations. First, I want to say to Rashid, I disagree with you completely that the fear is kind of related. The elephant in the room is the racism. I think the elephant in the room is the fear in terrorism, Islamic terrorism. And but I want to tell you that I kind of feel we are speaking about here about creating new problems, not solving them. The real problem is to get to the peace in Middle East, and not to create the new problems. Tell me one country around here where you will see that the people who have invited the Islamic refugees have really managed to solve the problems. We see what has happened in Sweden and elsewhere. I don't think we are going to solve it, and I also think that majority of the people in the camps really want to go home, and we should do everything to enable them to go to home. Lastly, I want to tell you that I changed my view on this problem very much a few weeks ago when I saw the story of the BBC about the UN special envoy about migration, who spoke 3 years ago in 2012 at the International Conference on Migration, and he told at this conference that Europe needs for its prosperity mass migration. I think it says it all.
It needs what?
Mass migration.
Yeah.
Mass migration.
Because of its aging and demography and so on, yeah. Is there one more that I can take? Anybody? Yes, another one at the back, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, one comment. I'm Anna Karolin. I'm the policy advisor for the Estonian Roundtable for Development Cooperation. And just a very important fact about refugee policy in Estonia. So regardless of the crisis that is happening in Europe now, that obviously has countries being very nervous about accepting refugees, there is a reason why Estonian authorities are not very prepared to take refugees, either Muslim or any other origin. And this is that Estonia has not taken refugees for political reasons, not a lot, and as many as they should, before the crisis began. So both international and Estonian human rights organizations, such as the Human Rights Center and the Estonian Refugee Council, have been claiming this for years. And this is because the refugee policy has been looked from the perspective of internal security rather than international humanitarian law or human rights law. And so that's why when we talk about preparing for refugees and how come it seems such a strange topic, it is because we have not been preparing during the peace times. And now we're in difficult times where this preparation is critical. So that's just one comment regarding the refugee debate in Estonia. But my question is rather about the constructive debate, or rather a debate that should become constructive in Estonia. And this is directed mostly to Ilmar Raag, because I know that he works on this. And this is a question, how and what should Estonian political actors, and by this I mean political parties, politicians, high officials, do and say and work towards proactively so that the debate in Estonia would become more friendly, less about hate speech and not being able to say something and having death threats, and more about making sure that we do not tolerate extreme racism, or that we say that we are an open society. So what do you think these actors should do, considering that perhaps the answers to the refugee debate have been a bit short in the beginning and now are starting to shape up? Thanks.
Well, that's a very good question, and it would come very directly to Ilmar to begin with, and then we'll go back to the others.
Obviously, the answer is, and this is already widely discussed in Estonian society, that the answer is yes, Estonian politicians should have been tackling this subject much earlier. We are at least 15 to 20 years behind the schedule, because when Estonia joined this UN Refugee Convention, then actually we established some framework of...
when was that?
It was 97.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if we add their obligations that we accepted while we joined the European Union, that we had in place some legal framework to deal with the refugees. But in fact, we didn't do with that really anything. Just to take that during the last 10 years, there has been about 700 something applications to get the refugee status in Estonia, And so far, Estonia has granted this status to about 120-something refugees. So basically, we have been really very conservative on this issue, and we haven't developed our capacities to integrate and to accept refugees. Now, the problem has definitely two parts. One part is a very technical part, and this is about the logistical, the political capacities to deal with refugees. But the other part is the overall attitudes of inside in the society, Estonian society, and here the movement can be only two-sided. It is impossible to think that only government or some politicians can say that, okay, we have now these values and that's it. The rest of the society will just embrace those values. There must be a civil society movement toward it also, because if we are to think that we can successfully integrate those other people, then this must be an effort of basically the whole society, because this is a question of just everybody who can rent a room to that other guy or other family, or who can offer a job to some other people. And we see that the racial attitudes today are basically putting an obstacle to this development, and we are forcing some kind of hostile attitudes. We're provoking hostile attitudes while we are hostile ourselves. Now, very honestly, I have not. I don't have a very good plan to imagine what the politicians should have done so far, because I know that they haven't done a lot. They have done only very little. But then, as I said, this is from one part stating their values, and from the other part provoking civil society to go further.
What do you think? What should Estonian leaders do?
I think there was a question that I was thinking of asking the audience, but maybe it's just too complicated, is what do you think of Angela Merkel's leadership in this crisis? Has she actually made matters worse, or has she made matters better? But I'm a great admirer of Angela Merkel. She's an extraordinary woman. She's normally very deeply risk-averse and doesn't stick her neck up. But on this issue, she has taken a position from a relatively early stage in her. When those Pegida demonstrations started in Germany last year, Angela Merkel came out in her New Year's address and simply said, I don't believe that is the way we should behave in Germany. This is hostile to foreigners. It's hostile. It's not our way. We have learnt differently from our history, from our morals, from our and she took the lead, and she's gone on taking the lead. In my own country, David Cameron has failed to take the lead. He is running after the opinion polls, which suggests that people are very nervous about immigration, very nervous about foreigners. And there I think there is a very clear difference. I think if you're elected as a politician, then you should actually be prepared to speak out for your fundamental values.
But I think the fundamental problem, if I may say so, in Estonia is that until very recently we didn't even know that the racist attitudes are so widespread in Estonia, because let's imagine that 10 years ago some Estonian prime minister would say that we need to open ourselves, we need to invite other workers here or different kind of people here. I think it would have been just a declaration, because there's not many people who would like to come and live in Estonia, because we don't have the the social system that would support this. And if we don't have those other people in Estonia, then Estonian population wouldn't have anything to react upon something. That's why this process starts here, and we know that this is a long-term process.
We've got 33 seconds left, Ahmed.
Well, I'll just say very briefly. I mean, it's not the job of an outsider to say what Estonian politicians should or should not be saying. But I think, I hope Estonian politicians show leadership, essentially, and do not allow, and very strictly and strongly, not allow this any kind of racist or a wrong thinking amongst other politicians and the media and the parties. I think the other thing that could be done is a serious debate about the practicalities of having refugees here. How would you deal with them? How would you educate them? How would you house them? What, et cetera, et cetera. Rather than just, going on about, should we have 300 or 400 or 500, let the media and the politicians discuss the aspects of how the government and society will deal with it. The other thing certainly the fear of terrorism is enormous. But as I said, this category of refugees are a different bunch than what we have seen coming out of wars and coming out of Africa and coming out of Asia, or coming out in the post-Vietnam War period when hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese fled. I mean, this is a very different category. And now I'm not saying there's going to be no terrorism, because it would certainly be to ISIS's advantage to plant people in these refugees and so that they can get a grip in Europe or start living in Europe or whatever. But I at the same time, I think there's been no sign of that so far. And, there's been no propaganda, these refugees, there's been no propaganda on the route talking about Islamism and extremism and all the rest of it. And I think right now, the kind of mood the refugees are in, they're not going to tolerate anyone trying to preach extremism amongst them. So these refugees are potentially allies, in my opinion, of the security forces in Europe, etc., for the time being. That they want to reach Germany or wherever, they want jobs, they want schools for their kids, and they're not going to tolerate any young brat from ISIS coming along and telling them what to do or to plant a bomb here or do something like that. So I don't see this as such a huge threat at the moment.
If you wish to create fertile ground for terrorism, what environment is more likely to create it? Miserable refugee camps without adequate schooling, water, food, for decades and decades, think Palestinians? Yeah. Or do you say, our doors will be open, we will bring you in, help you go home again if we can make peace? I think the most difficult question we had to answer is the answer of making peace in the Middle East. But thank God we haven't been here to try and solve that problem today. Ahmed and Ilmar, thank you both very much, and I think it's time for coffee. So, thanks very much. Thanks. Do you want to hang on to that? Ahmed, do you want to hang on to it?